Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know a lot of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we start, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and just relax. The Bradwick Sound Incident. My brother Marcus has been working harbor patrol for almost 15 years now. He's not someone who scares easily, and he definitely doesn't make things up. The guy is about as straightforward as they come, just does his job, goes home to his family, and doesn't think much about anything supernatural or strange. But there's this one story he told me that happened back in 2019, and even now when he talks about it, you can see something change in his eyes, like he's still trying to make sense of what he saw out there. It was late September when he got assigned to check on an old lighthouse station up in Bradwick Sound, about 40 miles north of Seattle. The place had been automated since the 80s, but the Coast Guard still owned the property and needed someone to do a routine inspection before winter hit. The lighthouse sat on this small rocky island, barely big enough to hold the tower itself, a small equipment shed, and an old dock that was half rotted away. You could only get there by boat, and only during high tide when the water was calm enough to navigate the rocks. Marcus was supposed to go with another officer named Derek, but Derek's kid got sick at the last minute, so Marcus ended up going alone. He didn't mind it, said he actually preferred working solo sometimes. Less talking, more focus on getting the job done. The boat dropped him off on a Tuesday morning around 10. The weather was grey but calm, typical Pacific Northwest autumn day. He had enough supplies for 3 days, all his inspection equipment, and a satellite phone in case anything went wrong. The lighthouse itself was nothing special, just a 60-foot concrete tower painted white with red stripes, built back in the 1920s. The automated beacon still worked fine, running off solar panels and backup batteries. His job was mainly to check the structural integrity, test the backup systems, and make sure no vandals had broken in. The first day went exactly how he expected. He checked the foundation for cracks, tested all the electrical systems, made sure the beacon was rotating properly. The only thing that seemed off was how quiet everything was. Usually you'd hear seabirds, maybe some seals on the rocks, but that day there was nothing, just the sound of waves hitting the shore. He set up his sleeping bag in the equipment shed since it had a small heater and was more sheltered than the lighthouse itself, made some instant coffee, ate a couple of MREs, and settled in for the night with a paperback novel. That's when things started getting strange. Around midnight, Marcus woke up to the sound of the lighthouse door slamming shut, which didn't make sense because he'd locked it himself after finishing his inspection. The door was heavy steel with a deadbolt. It couldn't just blow open and closed. He grabbed his flashlight and went to check. The door was still locked, exactly how he'd left it. But when he shined his light through the small window, he saw something that made him freeze. There were wet footprints on the stairs inside, fresh ones, still dripping water, leading up the spiral staircase. Marcus stood there for a good minute, trying to process what he was seeing. The lighthouse had been empty when he locked it. He was alone on the island, and those footprints, they weren't from boots. They looked like bare feet, but wrong somehow, too long, with what looked like webbing between the toes. He unlocked the door and went inside, following the wet trail up the stairs. His hand was on his service weapon, though he wasn't sure what good it would do. The footprints went all the way up to the beacon room, then just stopped, right in the middle of the floor, like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. The beacon was still rotating normally, casting its beam out across the dark water. Marcus checked every corner of the room, even looked out all the windows, but there was nobody there. Just those impossible footprints already starting to dry on the metal floor. He went back down and relocked the door, then returned to the shed. But he didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just sat there with his back against the wall, flashlight in one hand and radio in the other, waiting for dawn. The next day, he tried to convince himself he'd imagined it. Maybe there was a leak somewhere that created the puddles. Maybe the pattern just looked like footprints in the dark. He spent the morning finishing his inspection checklist, trying to focus on the normal, routine tasks. But when he went to check the beacon room again that afternoon, he found something that ended any attempt at rational explanation. There was a pile of seaweed in the center of the room. Fresh seaweed, still wet and smelling like low tide. It was arranged in a deliberate pattern, almost like a nest, and in the middle of it was a collection of small objects. Old coins, pieces of broken glass worn smooth by the ocean, and what looked like jewelry. Rings, a corroded watch, a tarnished silver chain. Marcus said the worst part was that some of the items looked familiar, like things you might see people wearing. Recent things. He took photos of everything, then got on the satellite phone to call for early pickup. Told them there was evidence of trespassing and potential criminal activity. He didn't mention the footprints or how the items had appeared in a locked room. While he waited for the boat, things got worse. The fog rolled in thick that afternoon, so dense he couldn't see more than 10 feet in any direction. The lighthouse beacon kept turning, but its light just bounced off the wall of white surrounding the island. And in that fog, Marcus started hearing things. Voices. Singing, actually, coming from somewhere out in the water. It wasn't any language he recognized, and the melody was wrong. The notes didn't follow any pattern that made sense, rising and falling in ways that made his teeth ache. Sometimes it sounded like one voice, sometimes like dozens, all harmonizing in that strange, unsettling way. He tried to record it on his phone, but when he played it back later, all he got was static. The singing continued for hours, getting closer, then farther away, like whatever was making it was circling the island. A few times, Marcus thought he saw shapes in the fog, tall figures standing at the edge of the water, just out of clear sight. But whenever he tried to focus on them, they'd disappear. By evening, he'd barricaded himself back in the equipment shed. The singing had stopped, but somehow the silence was worse. He could hear things moving outside, wet footsteps on the rocks, something heavy dragging across the ground. Once, something scratched at the door, long and slow, like it was testing the wood. Marcus sat there with his weapon drawn, knowing it probably wouldn't help, but needing to feel like he had some kind of defense. He tried the satellite phone again, but now it wouldn't connect. The regular radio just gave him static. Then, around 2 in the morning, everything stopped. The fog cleared like someone had flipped a switch. The stars came out, bright and clear, and Marcus could see the water around the island. It was full of them, dozens of figures floating just beneath the surface, pale and long-limbed, their faces turned up toward the lighthouse. They weren't quite human. Their proportions were all wrong, arms too long, eyes too large. But they were close enough to human to be absolutely terrifying. They stayed there for maybe an hour, just floating, watching. Then, as the eastern sky started to lighten with dawn, they sank back down into the deep water and disappeared. The boat showed up an hour after sunrise. The crew said Marcus looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He filed his report, mentioning only the evidence of trespassing and recommending the lighthouse be sealed until a full investigation could be done. He never went back. Transferred to inland duties a month later, said he was done with anything involving the ocean. Still won't talk about most of what happened that night, and when he does, he keeps it short and factual, like he's afraid saying too much might somehow bring them back. The lighthouse is still there, still operating on automatic, but the Coast Guard doesn't send anyone out to inspect it anymore. They monitor it remotely now, and when it eventually breaks down, Marcus says they'll probably just let it go dark rather than send someone to fix it. Some places, he told me, aren't meant to have people, and whatever claims the water around Bradwick Sound, it's made it very clear that humans aren't welcome there. The Marsh Point Light. This happened to my college roommate Sarah back in 2021, right when things were starting to open back up after the lockdowns. She'd just gotten her marine biology degree and landed what she thought was a dream job with the state wildlife department in Louisiana. Part of her work involved monitoring bird populations at various coastal sites, including some of the old lighthouse properties that had been converted to wildlife refuges. Most of them were just day trips. Drive out, count birds, take some water samples, drive home. But there was one location that required an overnight stay because of the tides and its remote location. Marsh Point Light sat about 15 miles into the wetlands, accessible only by airboat during certain times of year when the water levels were just right. It wasn't a tall lighthouse like you'd picture, more like a two-story house on stilts with a light tower attached, built in the 1890s to help ships navigate the tricky channels between the barrier islands. Sarah was excited about the assignment. She'd always been one of those people who preferred animals to humans, loved the solitude of fieldwork. The department paired her with an older researcher named Bill who'd been doing these surveys for 20 years. He knew every bird call, every plant species, could navigate the marshes blindfolded. They headed out on a Monday morning in late October. The weather was perfect, cool and clear, barely any humidity for once. The airboat ride took about 2 hours, winding through channels that all looked identical to Sarah, but that Bill navigated without hesitation. Marsh Point Light looked exactly like the photos she'd seen in the old Coast Guard archives. White clapboard walls, green metal roof, windows with working shutters. The state had maintained it pretty well as a field station. Solar panels for basic power, a rainwater collection system, even a composting toilet. They spent the first day doing their surveys, counted herons and egrets, documented some rare woodpeckers, took water quality readings at various points around the island. Bill showed her how to identify different frog calls, pointed out alligator slides in the mud. Normal ecology stuff. As the sun started setting, they headed back to the lighthouse to enter their data and cook dinner on the camp stove. That's when Bill mentioned something that Sarah said should have been her first warning. "Just so you know," he said, stirring a pot of beans, "sometimes folks hear things out here at night. Old sounds carrying over the water. Don't pay it any mind." Sarah asked what kind of sounds, and Bill just shrugged. "Could be anything. Gators fighting, birds we can't identify, maybe sounds from fishing boats way out in the Gulf. Sound travels funny over water." They ate dinner, played a few hands of cards, then turned in early since they'd be up at dawn for more surveys. Sarah took the upstairs bedroom while Bill set up his cot in the main room downstairs. She fell asleep pretty quickly, tired from the day's work and lulled by the normal night sounds of the marsh. She woke up around 1 in the morning to the sound of someone walking on the dock outside. Not the random creaking of old wood, actual footsteps. Slow, measured, like someone carrying something heavy. They'd walk a few steps, pause, then continue. The pattern repeated over and over. Sarah lay there listening, waiting for Bill to check it out. But after a few minutes of silence from downstairs, she got up and crept to the window. The dock stretched out about 30 feet into the water, lit by the half-moon. She could see the whole length of it clearly. There was nobody there, but the footsteps continued. She could hear them directly below her window now, that same slow, heavy tread on the wooden planks. The dock even seemed to vibrate slightly with each invisible step. Then she noticed the water around the dock. It was moving in a way that didn't match the gentle current, swirling in slow circles, like something large was moving just beneath the surface. As she watched, a hand broke through, pale, swollen, fingers bent at wrong angles. It gripped the edge of the dock for a moment, then slipped back under. Sarah backed away from the window, heart hammering. She wanted to call out to Bill, but something kept her quiet. Maybe the feeling that making noise would draw attention she didn't want. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, everything was silent except for the normal chirping of insects. Then she heard the lighthouse door open downstairs. Not break open or force open, just the quiet click of the latch and the slow creak of hinges, like someone with a key had let themselves in. Wet footsteps crossed the floor below. She could hear water dripping, the squish of soaked fabric. A chair scraped across the floor. Then nothing. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the room, barely breathing. Every instinct told her to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The room was basically empty except for her sleeping bag and backpack. Then Bill started talking downstairs, not calling out or sounding alarmed, just having a quiet conversation. She couldn't make out the words, but his tone was calm, almost friendly, like he was chatting with an old acquaintance. The problem was, she could only hear Bill's voice. Whoever he was talking to wasn't making any sound at all. This went on for maybe 20 minutes. Bill's one-sided conversation, punctuated by long pauses where he seemed to be listening to responses Sarah couldn't hear. Once he laughed. Not his normal laugh, but something hollow and wrong. Then the footsteps started moving again. Across the room, to the stairs, coming up. Sarah grabbed her flashlight but didn't turn it on. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, holding her breath as the steps got closer. They were different now. Not the heavy tread from the dock, but something lighter, almost delicate, like someone walking on their toes. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and paused right outside her door. She could see shadows moving in the gap under the door. Not one pair of feet, but several, all standing perfectly still. Then Bill called up from downstairs, his voice perfectly normal. "Sarah, you awake? Thought I heard something outside." The shadows under the door vanished instantly. The footsteps, she heard them going back down the stairs, but it sounded like they were skipping steps, moving too fast to be natural. "Sarah," Bill called again. "Yeah," she managed, her voice cracking. "I'm awake. Just checking. Probably just a gator bumping the dock. Go back to sleep." She didn't sleep. She sat there with her back against the wall until dawn, flashlight in hand, listening. A few times she heard movement downstairs, that wet sliding sound, but Bill never called up again. When the sun finally rose, she packed her things and went downstairs. Bill was already up, making instant coffee like nothing had happened. He looked completely normal, dry clothes, same friendly demeanor. "Sleep okay?" he asked. Sarah just nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They spent the morning finishing their surveys, but Sarah couldn't focus. She kept watching Bill, looking for any sign that he remembered the night's events. But he acted completely normal, chatting about birds and weather patterns like always. It wasn't until they were packing up to leave that she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Bill's boots were sitting by the door, still soaking wet. Not damp from morning dew, completely soaked through, with bits of marsh grass stuck to them. And when he bent over to pack his equipment, she saw scratches on the back of his neck, deep ones in parallel lines, like something with claws had gripped him there. He must have noticed her staring because he straightened up and gave her a long look, not threatening exactly, but knowing. Some things about this place, he said quietly, it's better not to ask about. You do your work, you respect what lives here, and you go home safe. That's the deal. Sarah nodded, understanding the warning. The boat ride back was silent. When they reached the dock, Bill helped her unload her equipment and then said, I'll handle the Marsh Point surveys from now on. Put in for a transfer to the northern sites. Better bird variety up there anyway. Sarah took his advice. Transferred within the week. Never went back to the deep marshes. She's still doing wildlife work, but strictly in areas accessible by car now. Won't even take assignments that require overnight stays. She told me once that the worst part wasn't what she saw or heard that night. It was realizing that Bill knew exactly what was happening, that he'd been going out there for 20 years, having those midnight conversations with whatever lived in the marsh, and that maybe, after enough time, the things that visited in the night stopped being intruders and started being expected company. Some people, she said, adapt to things they shouldn't, and once you start down that path, there's no telling where it ends. The Beacon at Black Cove. I met Tom at a bar in Portland about 5 years ago. He was one of those guys who'd clearly seen some things, had that 1,000-yard stare that comes from too many years of hard living. We got to talking, and when he found out I collected lighthouse stories, he told me about his experience at Black Cove. This was back in 2016, he said. He'd been working as a handyman and general contractor, taking whatever jobs came his way. Money was tight, so when some property management company offered him $5,000 to spend a week fixing up an old lighthouse on the Oregon coast, he jumped at it. The company had recently acquired the property, some deceased estate situation where the lighthouse had been in private hands for decades. They wanted to assess whether it could be converted into a vacation rental, or if they should just tear it down and build something new. Black Cove Light wasn't on any of the tourist maps. It sat on a jagged piece of coastline about 2 hours south of Newport, accessible only by a winding dirt road that cut through dense forest. The nearest town was 30 miles away. Tom drove out on a Sunday evening, his truck loaded with tools, supplies, and enough food for a week. The road was worse than he expected, barely wide enough for one vehicle, with drop-offs on one side and trees scraping the other. Took him 3 hours to go 20 miles. He reached the lighthouse just as the sun was setting. First impression was that the place looked solid. Stone tower about 40 feet high, attached to a 2-story keeper's house. The buildings were old, but not falling apart. Somebody had maintained them, at least minimally. The property manager had given him a key and a list of repairs. Check the roof for leaks, assess the plumbing and electrical, repair any broken windows, general cleanup. Basic stuff. Tom figured he'd knock it out in 4 or 5 days, pocket the money, and be home by the weekend. He unloaded his gear and set up in the keeper's house. The electricity worked, which was a nice surprise, though the wiring looked ancient. The plumbing was shot, no running water, but he'd brought plenty of jugs. There was even some old furniture, covered in dust, but usable. That first night, Tom said he felt pretty good about the job. Yeah, the place was isolated, but he'd worked remote sites before. He made himself a sandwich, had a couple beers, and crashed early on the couch in the living room. He woke up at 3 a.m. to the lighthouse beacon turning on, which should have been impossible. The property manager had specifically told him the light hadn't worked in 20 years. The lens was supposedly cracked, the rotation mechanism seized up. But there it was, a bright white beam sweeping across the ocean and forest, rotating slowly like lighthouses are supposed to. Tom went outside to get a better look. The light was definitely coming from the top of the tower, regular as clockwork. He could even hear the old mechanism grinding away inside, but when he tried the tower door, it was locked. Not just locked, rusted shut, like it hadn't been opened in decades. He spent an hour trying to force it open with no luck. Eventually the beacon just stopped, went dark like someone had flipped a switch. Tom told himself the electrical system must be more screwed up than he thought, made a note to check it in the morning, and went back to bed. The next day, he started his inspection. The keeper's house needed work, but nothing major. Some rot in the window frames, couple holes in the roof, old wiring that probably wasn't up to code but still functioned. He spent most of the day on the exterior, patching and measuring. It wasn't until late afternoon that he got the tower door open. Took a crowbar and a lot of WD-40, but finally the rust gave way. The smell that came out made him gag, like seaweed and dead fish, but worse, sweet and rotten at the same time. The spiral stairs inside were iron, so corroded that some of them crunched under his weight. He tested each one carefully, making his way up. The walls were stone, slick with moisture and some kind of black mold. His flashlight barely penetrated the darkness. Halfway up, he found the first room. Door hanging open, interior completely empty except for one thing, a pile of clothes in the corner. Not old, historical clothes. Modern stuff. Jeans, t-shirts, sneakers, different sizes, men's and women's. All of it damp and starting to rot. Tom said he stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Maybe squatters had been using the place? But how did they get in with the door rusted shut? And why leave their clothes? He continued up to the beacon room. The lens was there, and it was definitely cracked, a spider web of fractures across the glass. The rotation mechanism was a mess of rust and broken gears. There was no way this light could have been working the night before. But there were footprints in the thick dust. Fresh ones. Bare feet, walking in circles around the lens. The prints were strange, too long, with what looked like webbing between the toes. And they were wet, despite no sign of water getting into the room. Tom got out of there fast, went back to the house, locked the doors, and seriously considered leaving right then. But $5 was $5, and he'd already driven all the way out there. He told himself he'd just focus on the house repairs, leave the tower alone. That night, the beacon came on again. Same time, 3 a.m. exactly. Tom watched from the window as the beam swept across the landscape. This time, he noticed something else. Figures on the rocks below, lit up each time the beam passed over them. People, maybe a dozen of them, standing at the edge of the water. They weren't moving, just standing there, facing the lighthouse. When the light hit them, their skin looked wrong, too pale, almost translucent, and their proportions were off, like their limbs were too long for their bodies. The beam kept rotating, and each time it came around, the figures were a little closer. Not walking, Tom never saw them move, but definitely closer, like those old stop-motion movies where things jumped between frames. By the 5th rotation, they were at the base of the lighthouse. By the 7th, he couldn't see them anymore. They were too close to the building, out of the light's range. That's when he heard the front door of the keeper's house open. Not break open, just the quiet click of the latch, like someone had a key. Tom grabbed a hammer and his flashlight, crept to the top of the stairs. He could hear them down there, wet footsteps, things being moved around, drawers opening and closing like they were looking for something. Then the footsteps started up the stairs. Tom backed into the bedroom, shut the door, and shoved a dresser in front of it. The footsteps reached the landing, paused. He heard them moving down the hall, checking each room. Doorknobs turning, doors creaking open. They reached his door. The knob turned slowly. When it wouldn't open, something pushed against the door. Gently at first, then harder. The dresser started to slide across the floor. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The pressure on the door vanished. The footsteps retreated down the stairs, across the living room, out the front door. A moment later, the beacon went dark. Tom stayed barricaded in that room until dawn. When he finally came out, the house looked untouched except for wet footprints everywhere and that same rotting fish smell. All his tools were still there, nothing stolen. But on the kitchen table, someone had left something. A wallet, waterlogged and falling apart, but he could still read the driver's license inside. The photo showed a young guy, maybe mid-20s. The address was from Idaho. The expiration date was 2014. Tom found 3 more wallets scattered around the house. Different people, different states, all with licenses that had expired at least a year or 2 ago. One had a business card tucked inside, Marine Survey and Inspection Services. That's when Tom decided he was done. He threw his stuff in the truck and started down that winding road. About halfway to the main highway, his engine died. Just stopped, no warning. He tried to start it. Nothing. Battery was fine, tank was full, but the truck was completely dead. He was about to start walking when he saw someone coming up the road toward him. An old man, dressed in work clothes, walking with a slight limp. Tom had never been so glad to see another human being. The old man approached the truck, nodded like he wasn't surprised to see it there. "Black Cove?" he asked. Tom nodded. "They don't like it when people try to leave at night," the old man said. "Better to wait for morning. Always wait for morning." He opened Tom's hood, did something Tom couldn't see, and the truck started right up. Then he leaned in the window and said, "That lighthouse has been taking people for years, 1 or 2 every season. Contractors, inspectors, sometimes just folks who wander too close. The smart ones leave their gear and run. The stubborn ones." He shrugged. Tom asked why nobody did anything about it. Why keep sending people out there? The old man just smiled sadly. Because every few years, someone new buys the property. Someone who doesn't know, doesn't believe. They send someone to fix it up, make it profitable, and the lighthouse gets fed. Tom drove straight through to Portland, didn't stop until he was back in the city, left all his tools at the lighthouse, didn't even try to get the rest of his payment. He moved to Arizona a month later, said he wanted to be as far from the ocean as possible. Before I left the bar that night, Tom showed me something on his phone. Photos he'd taken of those wallets. I looked up one of the names later, Robert Chen, the Marine inspector. Found a missing persons report from 2014. Last seen heading to inspect a property on the Oregon coast. Never found. The Black Cove Lighthouse is still there, far as I know. Still gets sold every few years to new investors who think they've found a hidden gem. And every few years, someone else disappears. Tom said the worst part was realizing that old man on the road knew exactly what was happening, had probably known for decades. But instead of warning people away, he just made sure the survivors could leave. Like he was part of some unspoken agreement. The lighthouse gets its due, and in exchange, it lets some people go. Some places, Tom said, have their own rules, and once those rules are established, breaking them costs more than money. It costs lives. The keeper of Gull's Rest. My Aunt Patricia worked as a traveling nurse for almost 30 years, going wherever hospitals needed temporary help. She was tough as nails, had seen everything from gang shootings to natural disasters, and never let anything rattle her. But there was one assignment she took in 2018 that she still won't talk about unless she's had a few drinks. It was supposed to be an easy job, a 2-week stint providing medical support for a lighthouse restoration project on a small island off the coast of North Carolina. The State Historical Society was converting the old Gull's Rest Light into a museum, and with a crew of 12 workers staying on the island, they needed someone with medical training on site. The lighthouse had been abandoned since the 1960s when automation made keepers obsolete. It sat on a chunk of rock about 3 miles off the mainland, accessible only by boat. The island was bigger than most, maybe half a mile across, with a lighthouse on the north end and the old keeper's quarters scattered around it. Patricia took the job because the pay was excellent and she needed a break from hospital work. Figured it would be like a working vacation. Basic first aid, maybe some cuts and bruises, lots of fresh air and ocean views. The first week was exactly what she expected. The restoration crew was professional, careful, and nobody got seriously hurt. She spent most of her time reading in the makeshift medical station they'd set up in one of the old buildings, occasionally bandaging a minor cut or handing out aspirin. The crew was staying in trailers brought over by barge, but Patricia had been given one of the restored keepers' houses, a small 2-bedroom cottage that had been fixed up first to show what the whole place would eventually look like. It was actually nice, with running water, electricity from generators, even a little kitchen. Everything was fine until the second Monday, when they started working on the lighthouse tower itself. The crew boss, a guy named Rick, came to Patricia that morning looking troubled. He said some of his workers were reporting feeling sick when they went up in the tower. Dizziness, nausea, headaches. He wondered if there might be some kind of gas leak or toxic mold. Patricia grabbed her kit and went to check it out. The lighthouse was your classic design, red brick, about 90 feet tall, with the iron spiral staircase inside. The crew had already cleared out decades of bird droppings and debris from the lower levels, but the upper floors were still being cleaned. She climbed up with Rick and immediately felt what the workers were talking about. It wasn't quite dizziness, more like that feeling you get when you're on a boat in rough seas, except the tower was solid as a rock. The higher they climbed, the worse it got. But it wasn't until they reached the lamp room at the top that things got really strange. The room should have been empty. The original lens had been removed decades ago and sold to a museum. But there was something in the center of the floor where the lens apparatus used to be. A circle of what looked like salt or crushed shells, maybe 3 feet across, with patterns drawn inside it. In the middle of the circle was a journal, old, leather-bound, pages yellow and brittle. Rick reached for it, but Patricia stopped him. Something about the whole setup made her deeply uneasy. It looked too deliberate, too carefully placed. They called the state archaeologist, thinking it might be some kind of historical artifact. While they waited, Patricia convinced Rick to keep his crew out of the tower, said it was a contamination risk until they knew what they were dealing with. The archaeologist arrived the next day, a professor named Dr. Morrison who specialized in coastal history. He took one look at the circle and the journal and went very quiet, asked to speak to Patricia and Rick privately. What he told them sounded like something out of a horror movie. The journal belonged to the last keeper of Gull's Rest, a man named Thomas Bright, who'd been stationed there from 1958 until the lighthouse was decommissioned in 1964. According to official records, Bright had transferred to another lighthouse and retired peacefully in the 1970s. But the journal told a different story. Dr. Morrison had only skimmed a few pages, but what he'd read was disturbing. Bright wrote about things coming out of the sea at night, things that knocked on the lighthouse door and called him by name. He wrote about finding wet footprints in impossible places, about voices in the walls, about other keepers from other lighthouses who would visit him in dreams and tell him secrets. The final entries were the worst. Bright claimed he'd figured out how to keep the things away. The salt circle was part of it, along with certain words and rituals he'd learned. But the price was staying. He couldn't leave the lighthouse, ever. If he did, they would follow him, hunt him down, take him back. The last entry was dated 3 weeks after the lighthouse was officially closed. Rick wanted to throw the journal out and keep working. They were already behind schedule, and he didn't have time for what he called ghost stories. But Patricia noticed something that changed his mind. The work crew had 12 people, but that morning she counted 13. The extra person was always at the edge of her vision, always walking away when she tried to get a clear look, dressed like the other workers, hard hat and vest, but something was off about the way they moved. Too fluid, like they were gliding instead of walking. When she mentioned it to Rick, he went pale, said he'd been seeing the same thing for 2 days, but thought he was imagining it. They evacuated that afternoon, told the state there were structural problems that needed to be addressed before work could continue. Patricia never found out if the restoration was completed or if they just abandoned it again. But the thing that really haunted her happened as they were leaving. She was one of the last ones on the boat, making sure all the medical supplies were packed. As they pulled away from the dock, she looked back at the lighthouse one more time. There was someone in the lamp room window. Not the mysterious 13th worker, someone else. An old man in a keeper's uniform, watching them go. He raised one hand, and Patricia swore she could see him mouth 2 words. "Thank you." She asked the boat captain if anyone else was still on the island. He said no, everyone was accounted for. When she looked back, the window was empty. Patricia finished her 2-week contract, but refused the bonus they offered for the disrupted work. She went back to hospital nursing and never took another isolated assignment. Still has nightmares sometimes about being trapped in a lighthouse, drawing salt circles on the floor while things crawl up from the sea. The worst part, she told me, was that journal. Not what it said, but what it implied. That Thomas Bright had spent years, maybe decades, alone on that island after everyone thought he'd left, keeping his ritual, maintaining his circle, holding things back that wanted in. And now that they'd disturbed his work, broken his circle, taken his journal, who was keeping them back now? Who was standing watch? Night shift at Pelican Bay. I met Danny at a support group for people who'd had traumatic experiences at sea. Sounds specific, I know, but you'd be surprised how many of us there are. He was younger than most, mid-20s, baby face, still had that new hire enthusiasm despite what he'd been through. Danny had been working for a marine research company based out of Florida, one of those environmental monitoring outfits that contracts with the government. His job was to maintain and download data from automated weather stations on various offshore platforms and lighthouses. The door was chained shut, but chains didn't stop urban explorers. She had bolt cutters in her pack. The chain was newer than expected, shiny steel, no rust. Someone had secured this place recently. That should have been her first warning. Inside, the lighthouse was in better condition than she'd expected. Yeah, there was debris and bird crap, broken glass from the windows. But the iron spiral staircase was solid. The walls were intact. Plenty of dramatic shots to be had. She worked her way up slowly, photographing every angle. The light was perfect. Those storm clouds created a natural filter, all moody grays and deep shadows. She was so focused on her shots that she didn't notice what was wrong with them until later. In every photo, starting from about halfway up the tower, there were extra shadows, shapes that didn't match the architecture, didn't align with the light sources. Human-shaped shadows standing in corners, stretched along walls, reaching up from the stairs below. But Rebecca didn't see them in the moment. She was in the zone, that flow state photographers get when everything is clicking. She reached the lamp room just as the storm hit. Perfect timing, rain lashing the windows, wind howling, lightning turning everything stark white and pitch black. The lamp room still had its lens, a huge Fresnel lens, cracked and clouded but intact. It was beautiful in a broken way, exactly what her followers would eat up. She set up her tripod, framed the shot with the storm raging outside. That's when she noticed the scratches on the inside of the windows. Words, hundreds of them, carved deep into the glass. Names and dates going back decades. But not like "John was here 1962" graffiti. These were desperate. "Marie Cantrell died here 1947. They won't let me leave. Thomas B. 1961. Still here, still here, still here. 1978. The newest one made her blood run cold. He's keeping us, September 2022. Last month." Rebecca looked through her viewfinder again, and this time she saw them. The shadows weren't empty. They had substance, form, people. Dozens of people, all standing perfectly still, all staring at her camera. She jerked back from the tripod, and they were gone. Just shadows again. But when she looked through the camera, there they were, waiting, watching. Her phone had no signal, hadn't since she reached the island. The storm was getting worse, waves crashing over the rocks below. The fishermen wouldn't come back until sunset, and that was still hours away. Rebecca did what she always did when scared. She kept shooting, documenting. If something happened to her, at least there would be evidence. She photographed every inch of that lamp room, every scratched word, every shadow. That's when she found the hatch in the floor. It was hidden under debris, but the shadows, the people in her viewfinder, were clustered around it, pointing at it. She cleared away the junk and pulled it open. A ladder led down into darkness, not into the lighthouse. The geometry was wrong. This went deeper, into the island itself. Every instinct told her not to go down there, but the shadows in her viewfinder were gesturing urgently now, desperately, like they needed her to see something. Rebecca descended into the dark. The ladder went down maybe 20 feet into a natural cave system. The walls were wet limestone, carved by centuries of water. But someone had enlarged the passages, reinforced them with timber and stone. This wasn't just a cave. It was a hideout, a shelter. She followed the main passage, using her camera flash to light the way. The shadows in her viewfinder led her, always staying just ahead, guiding her deeper. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and what she saw there made her forget to breathe. Bodies, dozens of them, arranged carefully on stone shelves carved into the walls. Not skeletons, preserved somehow, mummified by the salt air. They wore different eras of clothing, 1940s dresses, 1960s work clothes, modern hiking gear, all perfectly preserved, like they were sleeping. In the center of the chamber was a man sitting at a makeshift desk, fresh compared to the others, maybe dead a month or two. He wore a keeper's uniform, though the lighthouse hadn't had a keeper in 80 years. There was a journal on the desk. Rebecca photographed it, page by page, hands shaking. The man's name was Walter Henley. He'd been coming to the island for 40 years, maintaining something, keeping a promise made by his grandfather, the last official keeper. The entries were meticulous, names and dates of everyone who'd come to the island, how he'd found them, what he'd done, why it was necessary. "They can't leave," he'd written. "That's the rule. Anyone who enters the lighthouse can never leave the island. My grandfather learned this too late, after the fire, after they'd already gotten out. But he came back, made it right, kept them here where they belong. I've continued his work. Every explorer, every tourist, Every photographer who breaks in thinking they've found something special. I make them special. I keep them safe. The island keeps them forever. But I'm old now. Sick. Can't make the boat trips anymore. Someone else will have to take over. Someone will come. They always do. The island calls them. To whoever finds this, you understand now. You've seen them through your lens. They're not shadows. They're echoes. And now you're part of it. The chain on the door wasn't to keep people out. It was to warn them. But warnings never work. Don't try to leave. The water won't let you. The boat won't come. Even if it does, you'll find yourself back here by morning. I fought it for a week before I understood. This is home now. Take care of them. Take care of the others who come. The island needs its keeper. It's your turn now. Rebecca ran, scrambled up the ladder, through the lamp room, down the spiral stairs. The storm was raging full force, but she didn't care. She ran to the rocky shore where the fisherman was supposed to pick her up. The boat was there, early, bobbing in the violent waves. But it was empty. She waded out, climbed aboard. The key was in the ignition. She'd never driven a boat, but how hard could it be? She started the engine, pointed it toward the mainland, and opened the throttle. The boat made it maybe 100 yards before the engine died. Just stopped, like someone had cut the fuel line. She tried to restart it. Nothing. The waves were pushing her back toward the island. That's when she saw them in the water. Not the shadows from her photos. Solid shapes, swimming with impossible grace. Surrounding the boat. Waiting. Rebecca grabbed the radio, screamed for help. Static. She triggered the emergency beacon. Nothing. The boat was drifting back to Chapel Island, pulled by current that shouldn't exist. She jumped, tried to swim for it, made it maybe 50 feet before they pulled her under. But they didn't drown her. They carried her back to the island, deposited her gently on the beach. When she coughed up seawater and opened her eyes, Walter Henley was standing over her, alive, whole, smiling sadly. "The camera shows truth," he said. "That's why photographers always come. Artists see what others miss. You saw them, so now you're seen. That's how it works." Rebecca spent 3 days trying to leave. Every attempt ended the same way. Back on the beach, Walter explaining patiently that this was home now. The mainland was only 2 miles away. She could see the lights at night, but might as well have been on the moon. On the 4th day, another boat arrived. Coast Guard, responding to the emergency beacon that had somehow, finally, gotten through. 2 officers, coming to check on a distress signal. Rebecca tried to warn them, screamed at them to leave, not to dock, to go back. But wind carried her voice away. They tied up, climbed onto the island, professional and concerned. She watched Walter greet them, watched him lead them to the lighthouse, watched them go inside. They never came out. That night, Walter showed her what her real job was, how to prepare the bodies, how to carry them down to the cave, how to arrange them peacefully on the shelves, how to write their names and dates in the journal. "We're preservers," he said. "We keep them perfect. The island needs its collection, and we're the curators. It's not a bad life, once you accept it." Rebecca didn't accept it. She fought, planned, schemed, but days turned to weeks, and every escape failed. The boats that came, fishermen, kayakers, curious tourists, she tried to warn them all. None listened. All ended up in the cave. Then, in December, something changed. A yacht appeared, anchored offshore. Rich kids, probably, looking for adventure. But they didn't approach. Just sat there, watching. Rebecca had an idea. She climbed to the lamp room with her camera, the one thing that still worked perfectly on the island. She used the mirror and her flash to send an SOS. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Over and over. Someone on the yacht flashed back. Message received. The Coast Guard came in force this time. 3 boats, a helicopter. Too many to stop, too official to turn away. They found Rebecca on the beach, catatonic, clutching her camera. They found Walter in the lighthouse, dead at his desk, journal open to his final entry. She wasn't ready. I'm sorry. They found the cave, the bodies, the decades of horror. But here's the thing. When they counted, there was one missing. The photographer from September, mentioned in Walter's journal. They searched the whole island, never found him. Rebecca spent 3 months in psychiatric care. When she finally spoke, she could only repeat one thing. He's still there. Someone has to be there. The island needs a keeper. Amy showed me Rebecca's photos from that day. Thousands of them, all technically perfect. The storm, the lighthouse, the lamp room. But every single one had those shadows. And if you looked closely, really studied them, you could see faces. All watching the camera. All waiting. The authorities sealed Chapel Island. Put up proper barriers, warning signs, patrol boats. But fishermen report lights in the lighthouse sometimes. Impossible, since the lens was removed as evidence. And every few months, someone goes missing along that stretch of coast. Boaters, mostly. People who anchor too close to the island. They find the boats later, empty, drifting. Rebecca knows why. She told Amy once, in a moment of clarity, the island needs its keeper. It'll call until someone answers. Someone always answers. She's never explained what she meant. Never said who was missing from the cave. Never admitted what really happened during those weeks she was trapped there. But sometimes, late at night, she looks through her photos from Chapel Island, studies those shadows, counts the faces, and whispers apologies to someone who isn't there, or maybe someone who is. The Mountain Pass incident. It was late October 2018. I was driving through the Colorado mountains with my 12-year-old daughter Sarah. We were heading to Denver to visit my sister for her birthday. The drive should have been about 8 hours total, but we got a late start because Sarah had a school event that morning. So we didn't leave until almost 3 in the afternoon, which meant we'd be driving through the mountains in complete darkness. My old Honda Civic was struggling with the steep climbs. The heater was working overtime because it was getting cold up there. Really cold. By the time we hit the highest parts of the pass, it was around 10:30 at night. Sarah had been quiet for the last hour. I thought she was sleeping. The road was narrow and winding with sharp drops on one side. No guardrails in some sections. Just darkness beyond the edge. I was gripping the steering wheel tight, taking each curve slow and careful. That's when I saw the red flashing lights ahead. At first I thought it was an accident, or maybe road work, but as I got closer, I could see it was just one car. A silver SUV pulled over to the side, its hazard lights blinking in the darkness. There was barely enough room for me to pass, but I slowed down anyway. Something about seeing another car broken down, in the middle of nowhere, in the freezing cold. It made me think I should stop and help. I pulled over just past the SUV, put my own hazards on, told Sarah to stay in the car and keep the doors locked. She mumbled something sleepily from the passenger seat. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, zipped up my jacket, and stepped out into the cold mountain air. It was so quiet up there. No sounds except the wind. I walked back toward the SUV, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I could see someone in the driver's seat. A woman. She was just sitting there, not moving. I knocked on her window. "Hey, you okay? Need help?" She turned to look at me slowly. Her face was pale in the flashlight beam. She rolled down the window just a crack. "My car died," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Want me to take a look?" I offered. "Or I can call someone for you." She shook her head. "No, but could you give me a ride?" Something felt off about this whole situation, but I couldn't just leave her there. It was freezing. No cell service in these mountains. The nearest town was at least 30 miles away. "Where are you trying to go?" I asked. She stared at me for a long moment. "Just down the mountain. Anywhere." I thought about Sarah in my car, about being responsible for my daughter's safety. But I also thought about this woman freezing to death. "Okay," I said finally. "You can ride with us to the next town." She got out of her car immediately. No purse, no belongings, just her. She was wearing a thin jacket, jeans, not really dressed for the cold. We walked back to my car in silence. I opened the back door for her. Sarah was awake now, looking confused and a little scared. "This lady needs a ride to town," I explained. "Her car broke down." Sarah didn't say anything, just watched as the woman slid into the back seat. I got back in and started driving. The woman didn't speak, didn't say thank you, just sat there. I could see her in the rearview mirror, staring straight ahead, not blinking much. After about 5 minutes of uncomfortable silence, Sarah turned to me. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm scared." Before I could respond, the woman in the back seat spoke. "You should be." My blood ran cold. I pressed down on the gas pedal a little harder. "What did you say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer. I looked in the rearview mirror again. She was smiling now. Not a friendly smile. Something else. "You know," she said slowly, "I've been waiting up here for hours, waiting for someone to stop." My hands tightened on the wheel. "Well, we'll get you to town soon," I said, trying to sound normal. "No," she said, "you don't understand. I wasn't waiting for help. I was waiting for this." Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. "Dad." That's when I noticed the woman was leaning forward, moving closer to us. I could hear her breathing, slow and deliberate. "Such a pretty daughter you have," she whispered. That was it. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded on the mountain road. "Get out," I said. My voice was shaking but firm. "Get out of my car right now." She laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You can't leave me here," she said. "It's so cold, so dark. Get out," I yelled. Sarah was crying now. The woman's smile faded. Her face went back to that blank expression. "Fine," she said. She opened the door. The cold air rushed in, She stepped out onto the dark road. Then she leaned back in. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, "when you get to where you're going. You'll see." She slammed the door. I hit the gas immediately, driving away as fast as I safely could on that narrow road. In the rear-view mirror, I could see her standing there, a dark figure against the darkness. Then she was gone. Sarah was still crying. I reached over and held her hand. "It's okay," I said. "She's gone. We're safe." But I didn't slow down. Not until we were miles away. Not until we could see the lights of the town below. We stopped at the first gas station we found. Bright lights. Other people. Safety. I called the police. Reported the woman and her abandoned car. They said they'd send someone to check it out. We sat in that gas station for almost an hour, drinking hot chocolate, trying to calm down. Sarah finally stopped shaking. When we got back on the road, I kept checking the mirrors, looking for any sign of that silver SUV, or that woman. But the rest of the drive was quiet. We made it to Denver around 2 in the morning. My sister was worried sick. We told her everything. She wanted us to stay longer, didn't want us driving back through those mountains. The next day, I called the police station, asked about the woman and the car. The officer said they sent a patrol up there, found the exact spot I described, but there was no car, no sign anyone had been there at all. "Are you sure you had the right location?" he asked. I was sure. I knew exactly where it happened, but according to them, nothing was there. We stayed with my sister for a week. When it was time to go home, we took a different route. Longer, but it avoided those mountains completely. Sarah still has nightmares sometimes, about that woman's smile, about her words. I do too, because I keep thinking about what she said, about seeing something when we got where we were going. We never saw her again, never figured out what she meant. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she's still up there, waiting by the side of that dark mountain road, waiting for the next person to stop. The desert highway. It was July 2019, the hottest summer on record in Arizona. I was driving from Phoenix to Las Vegas with my buddy Jake. We were going to a bachelor party for our friend Marcus. It should have been a simple 5-hour drive. Straight shot through the desert on Interstate 10, then up through Kingman on Highway 93. We left Phoenix around 6 in the evening. Figured we'd get to Vegas before midnight, have plenty of time to check into the hotel, maybe hit the casino for a bit. Jake was in charge of the music, had his phone plugged into my car stereo, playing all the old songs from college. We were laughing, talking about the old days, making plans for the weekend. The sun set around 7:30. The desert went from blazing orange to deep purple, then to black. Nothing but darkness on either side of the highway, just our headlights cutting through the night, and the occasional passing car. We stopped for gas in Wickenburg, small desert town about an hour northwest of Phoenix. Filled up the tank, grabbed some snacks and energy drinks, used the bathroom, normal road trip stuff. Got back on Highway 93 heading north. This stretch of road is known for being empty. Long stretches of nothing. No towns, no gas stations, just desert. It was around 9:30 when things got weird. Jake was looking at his phone, trying to find a better playlist. I was focused on the road, going about 75 miles per hour. That's when I saw the figure, standing on the side of the road, right at the edge of my headlight beam, just standing there, in the middle of nowhere. "Did you see that?" I asked Jake. He looked up from his phone. "See what?" There was someone standing by the road. Jake turned around to look back, but we were already too far past. "Probably just a cactus or something," he said. "Tricks of the light." I wasn't so sure. It had looked like a person. But what would someone be doing out here? We kept driving. 5 minutes later, another figure. Same position, right at the edge of the road, standing perfectly still. This time Jake saw it too. "What the hell?" he said. "Who stands on the side of the highway at night?" I slowed down a little, my eyes scanning the darkness. "Maybe they're broken down," Jake suggested. "Need help." But we hadn't seen any cars, no vehicles on the shoulder, just these figures, standing, watching. A few miles later, another one, then another, always the same, standing at the edge of the road, never moving, never trying to flag us down, just there. "This is creeping me out," Jake said. I had to agree. Something was very wrong here. "Maybe we should turn around," Jake suggested. "Go back to Wickenburg. Take a different route." I was considering it, but then I looked in the rearview mirror, and my heart stopped. There was a car behind us. No headlights. Completely dark, but I could just make out its shape. Following us, matching our speed exactly. "Jake," I said, trying to stay calm, "look behind us." He turned around, squinted into the darkness. "I don't see, wait. Is that a car?" "Yeah, with no lights on." We both stared at it, the dark shape staying perfectly positioned behind us, never getting closer, never falling back. I sped up to 80. It matched our speed. I slowed to 60. It slowed too. "What do we do?" Jake asked. His voice was tight with fear. Before I could answer, the figures on the side of the road started appearing more frequently, every few hundred feet now, all standing in the same position, all facing the road. And now I could see them better in the headlights. They were wearing white, all of them, long white robes or dresses. Their faces were covered, or maybe just turned away. I couldn't tell. "Drive faster," Jake said. I pressed the accelerator. 85, 90, the speedometer climbing. The dark car behind us kept pace. The white figures kept appearing, more and more of them, sometimes 2 or 3 together, standing in groups, silent, still, watching. "There," Jake pointed ahead. "Lights. There's a town or something." I could see it too, a glow on the horizon. Maybe a gas station, maybe a small town. Anything would be better than this dark highway. I pushed the car harder. 95, 100, the engine straining, the dark car still behind us, still matching our speed. The white figures now lining both sides of the road, dozens of them, like a silent audience. The lights were getting closer. I could see buildings, a gas station sign, an exit ramp. I took the exit at dangerous speed, tires squealing, Jake bracing against the dashboard. The gas station was right there. Bright fluorescent lights. A beacon of safety. I skidded into the parking lot. Slammed on the brakes. We both jumped out of the car, breathing hard. Looking back at the highway, the dark car had continued past the exit, disappearing into the night. No sign of the white figures. We stood there for a moment, under those bright lights, trying to process what had just happened. "What was that?" Jake asked finally. I shook my head. I had no idea. We went inside the gas station. The clerk looked at us strangely. Two guys, obviously shaken up, sweating despite the air conditioning. "You boys okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just weird stuff on the highway." His expression changed, became serious. "The figures in white?" he asked quietly. We both stared at him. "You've seen them?" Jake asked. The clerk nodded slowly. "Been happening for about a month now," he said. "People come in here all shook up, talking about figures on the road, cars following them with no lights." "What are they?" I asked. He shrugged. "Nobody knows. Cops have been out there. Never find anything. Only appears at night. Only on that stretch of 93. We stayed in that gas station for an hour, drinking coffee, trying to calm down. Other customers came and went. A few of them had the same look we did. That shaken, confused expression. They'd seen them too. Finally, we decided to get back on the road. But we took a different route. Went way out of our way. Added 2 hours to the trip. We didn't care. Anything to avoid that stretch of Highway 93. We made it to Vegas around 3 in the morning. The bright lights of the strip were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. We didn't tell anyone at the bachelor party. Didn't want to sound crazy. But Jake and I knew what we'd seen. Those figures. That dark car. Something was happening on that desert highway. Something nobody could explain. On the drive home, we took a different route entirely. Went through California. Added 4 hours to the trip. Worth it. I still drive to Vegas sometimes, but I never take Highway 93. Never drive through that stretch of desert at night, because I know they're still out there. The figures in white, standing by the side of the road, waiting, watching. For what? I don't know, and I don't want to find out. The Forest Service Road. It was September 2020, right in the middle of everything being crazy that year. I was driving alone from Portland to Boise, going to help my brother move into his new house. It's normally about a 7-hour drive, straight shot on Interstate 84 through the Columbia River Gorge, then across the high desert of eastern Oregon. I'd done it plenty of times before, but this time I left really late. Didn't get on the road until almost 8 at night. My GPS said I'd arrive around 3 in the morning. My brother said that was fine. He'd leave a key under the mat. I could crash on the couch. The first part of the drive was normal. Traffic through Portland. Then the beautiful gorge with the river on one side, cliffs on the other. By the time I hit the desert, it was completely dark. No moon that night, just stars and blackness. I stopped for gas in Pendleton around 11, stretched my legs, bought a large coffee, got back on the highway. That's when my GPS started acting weird. It wanted me to take an exit I'd never seen before. Said it would save 40 minutes. I'd driven this route so many times. Never knew about a shortcut. But 40 minutes is 40 minutes. And I was already tired. So I took the exit. It led to a 2-lane road heading southeast. The sign said, Forest Service Road 52. I'd never heard of it, but the GPS insisted this was the way. The road started out fine, paved, painted lines, normal, but after about 10 miles, it turned to gravel. My little Toyota Corolla bounced and rattled. I slowed down to about 35. The GPS still said this was right, still showed me saving time. The forest was thick on both sides now, tall pine trees blocking out the stars. My headlights only showing the next curve, the next hill, nothing else. I hadn't seen another car since leaving the highway. No houses, no signs, just this gravel road winding through the forest. After another 15 miles, I was starting to think I'd made a mistake, but the GPS kept saying to continue. Only another 20 miles to rejoin the highway. I'd already come too far to turn back. That's when I saw the truck, parked right in the middle of the road, blocking both lanes. An old pickup. Looked like it had been there a while, covered in dust. I stopped about 50 feet away, my headlights lighting it up. No one inside that I could see. No hazard lights. Just sitting there. I waited a minute, hoping someone would come out. Move it. Nothing. I honked my horn. The sound was swallowed by the forest. Still nothing. I couldn't go around. The trees were too thick on both sides. Ditches full of water. I'd have to move it myself, or turn around, go all the way back, add at least an hour to my trip. I didn't want to get out of the car. Everything about this felt wrong. But I was tired, frustrated, just wanted to get to my brother's house. I left the engine running, lights on, grabbed my phone for light, and got out. The silence hit me immediately. No insects, no wind, no animal sounds, just complete, heavy silence. I walked toward the truck, my footsteps loud on the gravel. It was an old Ford, maybe from the 80s, rust on the bumpers, dirty windows. I tried the driver's door, locked. Walked around to the passenger side, also locked. The bed of the truck was empty, except for some old tools, a shovel, a pickaxe, some rope. I was about to go back to my car, figure out another plan, when I heard it, a whistle, long and low, coming from the forest. I froze, listened. Another whistle answered it, from the other side of the road. My heart started pounding. I moved quickly back toward my car. That's when I saw them, figures stepping out from the trees. 3 of them, no, 4, moving slowly onto the road, between me and my car. They were wearing dark clothes. I couldn't see their faces. Just shapes in the darkness. "Hey," I called out, my voice cracking. "Is this your truck? I need to get through." They didn't answer, just kept moving closer, spreading out, surrounding me. I backed up against the old truck, my phone light shaking in my hand. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said. "I just need to get to Boise." One of them laughed, low and quiet. The others joined in. Not regular laughter. Something else. Something that made my skin crawl. They were getting closer. I could see them better now. Men, dirty clothes, faces smeared with something dark, mud maybe, or something else. One of them was carrying something, a stick. No, a bat. Run, one of them said. Just that word, run. I didn't need to be told twice. I sprinted toward the forest, away from the road, into the darkness. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the underbrush, whooping and hollering, like this was a game. I ran blindly, branches tearing at my clothes, stumbling over roots, my phone light bouncing wildly, showing glimpses of trees, shadows, nothing useful. I could still hear them, getting closer. They knew these woods. I didn't. I tripped over something, went down hard, phone flying from my hand, lost in the darkness. I scrambled to my feet, kept running. No light now, just darkness, and the sounds of pursuit. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost meaning, just terror and adrenaline, lungs burning, legs screaming. Then I saw it, a light, faint but real. I ran toward it, broke through the tree line, and found myself on a road, a different road, paved, with an actual highway sign. I could hear a car coming. I ran into the road, waving my arms. The car screeched to a stop. An elderly couple, looking terrified at this wild man coming out of the woods. "Please," I gasped, "please help me." They let me in, drove me to the nearest town, called the police. I told them everything. They sent officers to look for my car, for the truck, for the men. They found my car right where I'd left it, still running, lights still on, but the truck was gone. No sign it had ever been there, no sign of anyone in the woods. They said I was lucky, said people go missing on those Forest Service roads, especially at night. They gave me a ride back to my car, followed me to the highway, made sure I got back on track. I made it to Boise as the sun was rising. My brother could tell something was wrong. I told him the whole story. He said I should have known better, should have stayed on the main highway. He was right. I looked up Forest Service Road 52 later. It's real, but locals avoid it. Too many stories. Too many people who went in and never came out. The cops think it's drug-related. Meth labs hidden in the woods. People protecting their territory. But I don't think that's all it is. The way those men moved. The way they laughed. Like they'd done this before. Many times. Like it was sport. I never found my phone. Had to buy a new one. Small price to pay. I still have nightmares about that night. About running through those dark woods. Hearing them behind me. Knowing what would happen if they caught me. I still drive to Boise sometimes. But I stay on the highway. No shortcuts. No Forest Service roads. No matter how much time it might save. Because some shortcuts aren't worth taking. Some roads lead to places you don't want to go. And some people are waiting in the darkness. Waiting for travelers who take the wrong turn. Waiting to play their terrible games. The rest stop. It was April 2021. I was driving back home to Chicago from a work conference in Minneapolis. About a 6-hour drive down Interstate 94. I'd done it before. Usually left early in the morning. But the conference ran late. Networking dinner that went on forever. Didn't get on the road until almost 11 at night. My wife texted me. Said to just get a hotel. Drive back in the morning. But I wanted to sleep in my own bed. Wanted to be home. So I loaded up on coffee. Put on a true crime podcast. And started the long drive south. The first couple hours were fine. Light traffic. Good weather. Making good time. But around 1 in the morning, the coffee started running through me. I needed a bathroom bad. Started watching for rest stop signs. Finally saw one. Rest area 2 miles. I took the exit gladly. The rest area was bigger than most. One of those nice ones with the visitor center. Vending machines. Picnic areas. But at this hour, it was mostly dark. Just a few lights in the parking lot. The building itself dimly lit. There were 3 other cars in the lot. A semi-truck parked way in the back. Normal for this time of night. I parked close to the building. Hurried inside. The men's room was at the far end. Past the dark visitor center. Past the vending machines humming quietly. The bathroom was that industrial kind. All tile and stainless steel. Harsh fluorescent lights. Smelled like disinfectant. One stall was occupied. I could see feet under the door. I used the urinal. Washed my hands. The whole time, the person in the stall didn't move. Didn't make a sound. Just those feet. Perfectly still. I left quickly. Something about it bothered me. But I pushed the feeling away. People sleep in rest stop bathrooms sometimes. Happens. I was walking back through the building, past the vending machines, when I heard the bathroom door open behind me. Footsteps following. I glanced back. A man in a baseball cap, hands in his pockets, walking the same direction as me. Nothing unusual about that. We were both heading to the parking lot. I pushed through the exit door. The cool night air felt good. I could see my car, just 50 feet away. The footsteps were still behind me, getting closer, walking faster than me. I picked up my pace a little. So did he. I was almost at my car when he called out, "Hey, buddy." Got a second. I turned around. He was closer than I'd thought. Maybe 10 feet away. Average height. Jeans and a dark jacket. I couldn't see his face well. The baseball cap casting shadows. "What do you need?" I asked. My hand finding my car keys. "My car broke down," he said. "Was wondering if you could give me a ride. Just to the next exit." Something was off. Which car was his? Why hadn't I seen him in the parking lot when I arrived? Why was he in the bathroom if his car was broken down? "Sorry," I said. "I can't help you." I turned to unlock my car. "Come on, man," he said, moving closer. "It's just a few miles." I said no. I got my door open. Started to get in. That's when I saw the second man, coming around from the other side of my car. Where had he come from? "We really need that ride," the second man said. He was bigger than the first. Broader shoulders. Something in his hand. I couldn't see what. I jumped in my car. Slammed the door. Hit the locks. They were both at my window now. The first man tapping on the glass. "Open up," he said. His voice different now. Harder. "We just want to talk." I started the engine. Put it in reverse. The second man moved behind my car, blocking me in. I laid on the horn, long and loud, hoping someone would hear. The semi-truck was too far away, the other cars empty, or their occupants asleep. The first man pulled something from his pocket, a knife, started working at the weather stripping around my window. I threw the car in drive, jumped the curb, drove right through the grass, around them, over the sidewalk, back onto the exit ramp. In my rear-view mirror, I could see them running to one of the other cars, a dark sedan. Following, I floored it back onto the highway, speedometer hitting 90, 95. Their headlights appeared behind me, gaining. These guys knew how to drive. I grabbed my phone, called 911, told them everything, where I was, what happened. The dispatcher said units were on the way. Stay on the highway. Keep driving. Don't stop. The sedan was right behind me now. High beams on, blinding me. They bumped my rear bumper. Just a tap, trying to make me lose control. I held the wheel tight, stayed in my lane. Another bump, harder. My car fishtailed. I corrected, kept control. The dispatcher was still talking, telling me where the nearest police were. How many miles? Too many. These guys would catch me before then. Then I saw it. An exit, with a truck stop at the bottom. Bright lights. Lots of people. I took the exit at the last second. No signal. Tires screaming. The sedan tried to follow. Almost lost control. Had to brake hard. I gained some distance. Flew down the exit ramp. Into the truck stop parking lot. Parked right in front of the doors. Under the brightest lights. Ran inside. There were people. Truckers getting coffee. Employees behind the counter. Safety. I told the clerk to call the police. Told him men were following me, trying to hurt me. He took one look at my face, saw I wasn't joking, made the call. Through the window, I could see the dark sedan, parked at the edge of the lot, watching, waiting. Other truckers noticed, started asking what was wrong. I told them. 3 big guys decided to walk outside, stand by the door, just in case. The sedan stayed for 5 more minutes, then slowly pulled away, disappeared into the night. The police arrived 10 minutes later, took my statement, said they'd check the rest area, look for cameras, see what they could find. They never found anything. No cameras at that particular rest stop. No reports of similar incidents. Nothing. They said I was smart to run, smart to find somewhere public. These things happen sometimes. Teams working rest stops, looking for victims. People traveling alone, late at night. Easy targets. I stayed at that truck stop for 2 hours, until the sun started to rise, until I felt safe enough to continue. Made it home around 8 in the morning. My wife was furious, then terrified when I told her what happened. Made me promise to never drive alone at night again. I kept that promise. Mostly. But sometimes work requires it. Sometimes you have to drive when it's dark. When I do, I never stop at rest areas. Never. I'll drive an extra hour to find a gas station. A populated area. Somewhere with people and lights and cameras. because I know they're out there, working in teams, watching for cars with single occupants, waiting in dark parking lots, playing the broken-down motorist, the stranded traveler, anything to get you to stop, to let your guard down, to become a victim. I was lucky. I got away. Others might not be, probably haven't been. So if you're driving alone at night and you need to stop, be careful. Watch for the signs. Trust your instincts. And never, ever get out of your car if something doesn't feel right, because sometimes that feeling is the only thing standing between you and whoever is waiting in the darkness. The volunteer at Razor Point. My co-worker Janet used to volunteer for coastal cleanup projects every summer. She was one of those environmental warriors, always organizing beach cleanups, posting about saving the oceans, trying to get the rest of us to use metal straws. But after what happened at Razor Point in July 2021, she won't even go to the beach anymore. The cleanup was supposed to be a big event, 50 volunteers, local news coverage, sponsored by some big corporations trying to look green. The target was Razor Point, this stretch of Massachusetts coastline that had been closed to the public for decades. The state had finally decided to reopen it as a nature preserve, but first they needed volunteers to clear out years of accumulated trash. Razor Point got its name from the jagged rocks that jutted out into the Atlantic like broken teeth. Ships used to wreck there all the time before they built the lighthouse in 1847. Even after that, the waters were so dangerous that they automated the light in 1963 and sealed the whole area off. Too many accidents, they said. Too many liability issues. Janet arrived early that Saturday morning, eager to get started. She was a team leader, in charge of 12 volunteers assigned to the section nearest the lighthouse. The tower stood about 100 yards offshore on its own small island, connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway that disappeared at high tide. The lighthouse itself looked exactly like you'd expect from something abandoned for 60 years. Rust-streaked metal, broken windows, probably full of bird nests. The organizers had been very clear. Nobody was to go near the lighthouse. The causeway was unstable, the structure was condemned, and anyway, their permit only covered the beach. For the first few hours, everything went fine. Janet's team filled bag after bag with the usual beach trash, plastic bottles, fishing line, chunks of styrofoam. The weather was perfect, everyone was in good spirits, and they were making real progress. Around noon, one of Janet's volunteers, a college kid named Brad, came up to her with something strange. He'd found it buried in the sand near the high tide line, a glass bottle with something inside. Not a message exactly, but a photograph. The photo was old, black and white, showing a group of men in Coast Guard uniforms standing in front of the Razor Point lighthouse. Normal enough, except for their faces. Each man's face had been carefully scratched out with something sharp, leaving just holes where their features should be. On the back, someone had written in pencil, "They made us leave them. 1963. Janet told Brad to put it in the historical finds box. They'd been instructed to save anything that might have archaeological value. But as the afternoon wore on, more bottles started turning up, all buried at roughly the same depth, all containing photographs. Some showed the lighthouse during storms, waves crashing over the tower. Others were portraits of what must have been keepers and their families. But in every single photo, the faces were destroyed, scratched out, burned away, or cut out entirely. The writing on the backs got progressively stranger. Still inside, still watching. We shouldn't have locked the door. They're in the walls now. High tide coming forever. By 3 o'clock, they'd found nearly 30 bottles. Janet was getting uneasy, but the other teams were still working. and she didn't want to seem paranoid. She told her volunteers to stop digging so deep, focus on surface trash. That's when Brad decided to be an idiot. He'd been eyeing the lighthouse all day, making jokes about exploring it, seeing if there was cool stuff inside. Janet had told him no repeatedly, but when she was distracted helping another volunteer, Brad slipped away. She didn't notice he was gone until she heard him yelling from the causeway. He was about halfway across, waving his arms, shouting something she couldn't make out over the wind. He seemed excited, not scared, pointing at something in the lighthouse. Then he started running toward it. The tide was coming in. Water was already starting to cover the lower parts of the causeway. Janet yelled for Brad to come back, but he either couldn't hear her or didn't care. He reached the lighthouse, tried the door, found it locked, and started circling the building looking for another way in. That's when Janet saw them in the windows. People, pressed against every window of the lighthouse, palms flat on the glass, faces obscured by decades of grime and salt. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching Brad circle the building. She screamed for him to get away, to run back, but he was still oblivious. He found a broken window on the far side and started to climb through. The moment he touched the windowsill, the figures inside moved. All at once, jerking away from the windows and converging on wherever Brad was trying to enter. Janet couldn't see what happened next. Brad was on the other side of the lighthouse, but she heard him scream. Not a short, startled scream. A long, ragged sound that went on and on until it abruptly cut off. The other volunteers had noticed now. Everyone was standing at the edge of the beach, staring at the lighthouse. The project coordinator was on her phone, calling 911, and the tide was rising fast, already covering half the causeway. Janet made a decision she still has nightmares about. She ran for the causeway, thinking she could get to Brad before it was too late. But the moment her feet touched the wet concrete, something happened to the water around it. It turned black. Not oil-slick black, but empty black, like looking into a void. And in that blackness, she saw lights, dozens of them like eyes, rising up from the deep. The water started to bubble and churn, and shapes began breaking the surface. Hands, hundreds of hands, reaching up from the black water, grasping at the air. Old hands, young hands, some that barely looked human anymore, all of them reaching toward her. Janet stumbled backward onto the beach just as the first hand touched the causeway. Where it made contact, the concrete began to crack and crumble, years of erosion happening in seconds. The causeway collapsed, not dramatically. It just seemed to dissolve, sinking into that black water until there was nothing left but churning waves between the beach and the lighthouse. And Brad was gone. The windows were empty now, no sign of the figures she'd seen. The Coast Guard arrived within an hour. They searched for Brad, sent divers down, even brought in a helicopter. But the water around the lighthouse had turned strange. Their sonar showed impossible readings, depths that shouldn't exist, structures that couldn't be there. One diver came up after only 5 minutes, ripped off his mask, and refused to go back down. He wouldn't say what he'd seen. They called off the search at sunset. Brad was listed as missing, presumed drowned. The beach cleanup was cancelled. The area reclosed to the public. Janet and the other witnesses were interviewed, gave statements, were told not to spread rumors. But Janet couldn't stop thinking about those photographs. They made us leave them. The lighthouse had been automated in 1963, the keepers reassigned. But what if something had happened before that? What if the automation wasn't about efficiency, but about abandoning something that couldn't be saved? She did research, found old newspaper archives. In 1962, a year before automation, 3 keepers had gone missing at Razor Point. Official story was they'd been swept away by a storm, but their bodies were never found. The lighthouse stayed dark for a month before the Coast Guard could find anyone willing to take the assignment. The new keeper lasted 6 months before requesting transfer, citing health concerns. The next one made it 3 months. The last keeper, a man named Howard Crane, sent increasingly frantic reports about structural anomalies and presence in the tower before he simply stopped reporting at all. When they went to check on him, they found the lighthouse locked from the inside. Every door, every window, sealed tight. Crane was gone, but his clothes were there, laid out on his bed like he'd just evaporated out of them. That's when they decided to automate. Janet found one more thing in her research. A memo from the Coast Guard archives, dated the day they sealed the lighthouse. Automation complete. All personnel evacuated. Note: under no circumstances should anyone attempt to enter the tower. The doors have been welded shut for safety. What remains inside is no longer our responsibility. May God forgive us for leaving them. She never found out who them referred to. The 3 missing keepers? Or something else, something that had been in the lighthouse all along, that the keepers had been holding back. 2 weeks after the cleanup, Janet got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a glass bottle, and inside that was a photograph. It showed Brad. He was standing in what looked like the lighthouse lamp room, surrounded by people in old-fashioned clothing. Men in keeper uniforms, women in 1960s dresses, children in sailor suits. All of them were smiling. All of them had scratched-out faces except Brad. But his face was starting to fade, the features becoming indistinct, like he was slowly joining them, becoming part of whatever collection the lighthouse kept. On the back, in Brad's handwriting, they weren't trapped. They were keeping it in. Now I have to help. I'm sorry. Don't come looking. The door must stay locked. Janet moved inland a month later. Took a job in Colorado, about as far from the ocean as she could get. But sometimes she still gets packages. Always the same glass bottles with photographs inside. Pictures of Brad and the others, standing at the windows, watching the beach. His face gets a little fainter in each one. Soon, she thinks, it'll be completely gone. And then maybe the packages will stop. Or maybe that's when they'll start asking her to come back. The night photographer's tale. My friend Marcus was one of those extreme photographers who specialized in night shots of abandoned places. Not urban exploration exactly. He preferred natural settings. Old-growth forests, desert ghost towns, and especially coastal ruins. He had this technique for long exposures that made even the most mundane locations look otherworldly. In September 2019, he got a commission from a travel magazine to photograph lesser-known lighthouses along the California coast. They wanted moody, artistic shots that captured the lonely romance of obsolete architecture. Right up Marcus's alley. He'd already shot 4 lighthouses over 2 weeks when he reached Point Sorrow, about 50 miles north of San Francisco. It wasn't on any tourist maps. The access road had washed out in the 70s, and the state had basically forgotten it existed. Marcus had to hike 3 miles through dense forest just to reach the cliffs. Point Sorrow Light was a squat concrete tower, maybe 40 feet tall, built in 1923 after the original wooden lighthouse burned down. The keepers' quarters were long gone, just foundation stones overgrown with ice plant. But the tower itself was solid, if covered in graffiti and bird shit. Marcus arrived just before sunset, perfect timing for the blue hour. That magic time when the sky holds just enough light for long exposures but dark enough for stars to appear. He set up his gear and started shooting. working methodically around the tower. The first hour went perfectly. The conditions were ideal. Clear sky, no wind, just enough mist on the water to create atmosphere. Marcus was getting exactly the shots he wanted, already planning which ones to send the magazine. Then his camera started acting up. It began with the autofocus hunting, unable to lock onto subjects. Not unusual in low light, so Marcus switched to manual focus. But when he reviewed the shots on his LCD, they all seemed slightly off, like the lighthouse was leaning at angles that didn't match what he was seeing with his eyes. He checked his tripod level, checked his lens, clean. Took more shots. Same problem. In every photo, the lighthouse looked wrong, twisted somehow, like the concrete was bending. Marcus had been shooting professionally for 15 years. He knew his equipment, knew when something wasn't right. But the magazine deadline was tight, and he needed these shots. So he kept working, adjusting settings, trying different angles. That's when he noticed the light inside the tower, not the beacon that had been removed decades ago. This was coming from the windows at the base, a soft blue glow that pulsed like breathing. Marcus's first thought was other people, maybe urban explorers with LED lanterns. But the light was too steady, too uniform. He called out. No response. The door to the lighthouse was hanging open, locked long since broken by vandals or weather. The blue light spilled out onto the ground, creating patterns that shifted and swirled. Marcus knew he should pack up and leave. Every instinct told him something was wrong. But that light, it would make incredible photographs, the kind of shots that win awards, that define careers. He approached slowly, camera ready. The blue glow grew brighter as he got closer, revealing details inside the lighthouse. The walls were covered in something, not graffiti, but symbols, mathematical equations, star charts, diagrams that hurt to look at directly. And in the center of the room, the source of the light. It was a lens, not the original Fresnel lens, something else. Made of a material that looked like glass but moved like liquid, constantly reshaping itself. The blue light came from within it, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost organic. Marcus raised his camera and started shooting. Through the viewfinder, the lens looked even stranger. It seemed to extend beyond the physical space of the room, stretching into dimensions that the camera somehow captured, but his eyes couldn't process. He lost track of time. Could have been minutes or hours, just shooting frame after frame of that impossible lens. The blue light filled his vision, seeped into his thoughts. He began to understand that this wasn't just a lens, it was a window, and something on the other side was looking back. The camera's memory card filled up. Marcus mechanically switched to a fresh one, kept shooting. His hands moved on their own, adjusting settings he didn't remember learning. The photographs were changing, showing things that weren't there, or maybe things that were always there, just hidden from normal sight. Stars that weren't in Earth's sky, oceans that rose up instead of out, ships sailing through the air, their crews waving from the rigging, and in every shot, getting clearer with each frame, figures standing just outside the lighthouse, tall, thin shapes that moved between the moments, existing in the spaces between seconds. Marcus's second memory card filled, then the third. He reached for another, but his hand found something else in his camera bag, a note, written in his own handwriting, though he didn't remember writing it. The lighthouse at Point Sorrow was destroyed in the 1925 earthquake. What stands here now was built by something else. The lens shows what really is. Stop looking before you can't unsee. He blinked, suddenly aware of himself again. How long had he been shooting? The blue light was gone. His camera showed 3:17 a.m. He'd been photographing that lens for over 6 hours. Marcus grabbed his gear and ran. Not walked, not hurried, ran. Through the dark forest, stumbling over roots, branches tearing at his clothes. He didn't stop until he reached his car, didn't feel safe until he was 50 miles away. Back in his hotel, he reviewed the photos. The first few dozen were normal, moody shots of the lighthouse at dusk. Then they started to change. The building warped, twisted, became something that couldn't exist in 3 dimensions. The lens appeared, first as a faint glow, then clearer with each shot. The last 100 photos were impossible. They showed places that weren't on Earth, maybe weren't anywhere. Cities of glass rising from purple seas. Skies with 3 suns. And in every image, those tall figures getting closer, reaching toward the camera with hands that had too many joints. The very last photo showed Marcus himself, standing in the lighthouse, camera raised. But his eyes were gone, replaced by that blue light. And behind him, one of those figures had its hand on his shoulder. He deleted everything, formatted the memory cards, threw them away, told the magazine the lighthouse was inaccessible, sent them photos from his backup locations instead, tried to forget what he'd seen. But the dreams started immediately. Every night, he was back in that lighthouse, looking through that lens, seeing those other places, other skies. And every morning, he woke up with his hands positioned like he was holding a camera, finger pressing an invisible shutter button. Marcus lasted 3 months. Then one night, he packed his camera gear, drove back to Point Sorrow, and hiked through the forest one more time. His roommate reported him missing after a week. The cops found his car, but no sign of Marcus. I went looking for him myself, months later. Found the lighthouse easily enough. It's still there, still covered in graffiti, still abandoned. But there's no lens inside, no equations on the walls, nothing but empty concrete and bird shit, except for a single photo tucked into a crack in the wall. It shows Marcus standing in a place with 3 suns, his camera raised to shoot something outside the frame. He's smiling, but his eyes are that bright, terrible blue. On the back, in his handwriting, the lens found a better home. I had to follow. It's beautiful here. Don't come looking. You need the right eyes to see the way. I kept the photo. Sometimes, late at night, I swear it moves. Just slightly, like Marcus is still there, still shooting, documenting wonders and horrors in a place our cameras were never meant to capture. The lighthouse still stands at Point Sorrow. Empty now, the state says. But on clear nights, locals sometimes report a blue light in the tower, pulsing like a heartbeat, they say. Or maybe like the rhythm of a shutter, opening and closing, capturing moments between worlds. The renovation. Carol and her husband Ben bought the old Haven Light property in spring of 2020, right when everyone was fleeing cities for remote locations. It seemed perfect, a decommissioned lighthouse on the Connecticut coast with an attached keeper's cottage, all on 5 acres of private waterfront. The place needed work, sure, but they saw it as an adventure. They'd fix it up, maybe run it as a bed and breakfast eventually. I met Carol at a contractors' convention 2 years later. She was there trying to find someone, anyone, willing to work on the property. By then, she'd been through 6 different construction crews, and the lighthouse remained untouched. The trouble started immediately. The first contractor, a local guy with 30 years' experience, took one walk through the lighthouse and left without a word. Just got in his truck and drove away. When Carol called, he said he was too booked up, sorry. The second contractor made it a week. His crew stripped wallpaper in the cottage, started repairing the floors. Then they opened up a wall to update the plumbing and found something that made them pack up their tools. The contractor wouldn't say what, just muttered about structural issues and tore up the contract. Carol and Ben didn't give up. The cottage was livable enough, so they moved in, figuring they could manage the renovation themselves with occasional hired help. Ben was handy, Carol was determined, and how hard could it be? The lighthouse itself had been sealed since 1972, not just locked. The Coast Guard had welded the door shut and filled the lower windows with concrete blocks. The official reason was safety, but the more Carol researched, the stranger the story became. Old Haven Light had a perfect record until 1969. No accidents, no deaths, model keepers who stayed for years. Then something changed. 3 keepers in 3 years, each leaving suddenly. The last one, a man named George Whitmore, disappeared entirely. His replacement found the lighthouse in perfect order, beacon working, log books up to date. But Whitmore was gone, along with all his personal belongings. The Coast Guard automated the light, but the automation kept failing. Electrical systems would work fine for weeks, then suddenly surge and blow out. The backup generators would start on their own in the middle of calm days, and the light itself would sometimes flash patterns that weren't programmed. Long, short, short, long, spelling out messages in Morse code that no one could decode. After 3 years of problems, they shut it down, sealed it up, built a new navigation beacon on a platform offshore, and left Old Haven Light to rot. But it didn't rot. That was the weird thing. When Carol and Ben bought it, the structure was sound. Paint was faded, sure, and the cottage needed updating, but the lighthouse itself looked like it had been sealed yesterday, not 50 years ago. They decided to start with the cottage, leave the lighthouse for later. But the lighthouse didn't want to be ignored. It started with sounds. Footsteps in the tower, slow and measured, climbing the spiral stairs. They'd happen at exactly 6:17 each evening, sunset in November, though it was now July. Ben tried to record them, but the sounds never showed up on tape. Then the cottage renovations began to fail. Fresh paint would peel overnight. New floorboards would warp and crack. Modern fixtures would corrode as if exposed to decades of salt air in mere hours. One morning, they woke to find every improvement they'd made undone. The cottage returned to exactly how it looked when they'd bought it. But only the cottage. Their furniture, their belongings, everything they'd brought with them was fine. It was like the building itself was rejecting any changes. Carol found a name in the deed records, not a previous owner, but a note from the lawyer who'd handled the original sale in 1847. The lighthouse must remain as built. This is the condition of the transfer. Any alterations void the agreement. She dug deeper, found that Old Haven Light wasn't just built on this spot. It was built for this spot. The original plans showed elaborate foundation work, far more complex than a simple lighthouse needed. Diagrams that looked more like occult symbols than architectural drawings. Ben wanted to leave, said they should cut their losses, sell to some other optimistic fool. But Carol was stubborn and curious. She hired a metalworker to cut through the welded door. It took 3 tries. The first welder's equipment failed, all of it simultaneously, the moment the torch touched the door. The second welder made one cut before every piece of metal on his truck magnetized, tools flying together in a massive clump that took hours to separate. The third welder succeeded, but only because Carol had learned something. She'd found George Whitmore's journal in the County Historical Society. His final entry, dated the day before he disappeared. The lighthouse keeps its own time. 617 was when they built it, and 617 is when it wakes. It doesn't want to change because change would break the seal. I understand now. I've been trying to maintain something that maintains itself. It doesn't need a keeper. It is the keeper. Tomorrow I'll know what it's keeping. God help whoever comes after me. Carol waited until exactly 6:17 p.m. to have the welder start cutting. The torch sliced through the metal like butter. The door swung open, revealing stairs that curved up into darkness. The smell that came out was impossible, not decay or age, but ozone and salt and something else, like the air before a storm, but also like the air after, charged and clean and wrong. Carol entered first. The stairs were stone, worn smooth by countless footsteps. The walls were covered in words, carved deep into the rock. Not graffiti, more like prayers, or warnings. Stay as you were. Change breaks the binding. 6:17 eternal. The second floor was empty, except for windows that showed views that couldn't exist. The ocean, yes, but from angles that didn't match the lighthouse's position. Some windows showed daylight while others showed night. One showed the cottage, but it was new, fresh painted, with people in 1840s clothing standing on the porch. The third floor made less sense. The room was bigger than the lighthouse could contain. The walls breathed, expanding and contracting like lungs. In the center was a chair, simple, wooden, facing a window that didn't look out, but in, showing the inside of the lighthouse from an outside perspective. Carol sat in the chair. She had to. It was like the whole building had been waiting for someone to sit there again. The moment she sat, she understood. The lighthouse wasn't built to warn ships away from rocks. It was built to hold something in place. A weak spot, a crack between what is and what shouldn't be. The building itself was a seal, its unchanging nature the only thing keeping the crack from widening. Every renovation, every alteration weakened the seal. That's why the cottage kept reverting. That's why the keepers left or disappeared. They either understood and fled, or they understood and stayed, becoming part of the mechanism that held everything together. In the chair, Carol could feel it, the pressure from the other side. Things that wanted in, had been wanting in since 1847, held back only by the lighthouse's stubborn refusal to change. She could maintain the seal by sitting there, by becoming the new keeper. Or she could leave, let someone else discover what happened when the lighthouse finally fell. She sat there until Ben found her at 6:17 the next evening. 24 hours, though it felt like minutes. He dragged her out, carried her down the stairs. She tried to explain, but the words came out wrong, in languages she didn't know she spoke. They left that night, abandoned everything, drove until the car ran out of gas, then kept going on foot. It took 3 days for Carol's mind to clear, for her to remember how to speak only English. They never went back. But Carol knows the lighthouse is still there, still holding. She hired crews to work on it, sent them without explaining what they'd find. Most left immediately. A few lasted days. One made it a week before calling to say he'd welded the door shut again, stronger than before, and please don't contact him again. Carol still owns the property, pays the taxes, keeps it legally maintained. Sometimes she gets calls from interested buyers, but she tells them it's not for sale, can't be sold. The agreement from 1847 is still binding. She showed me pictures at that convention. The lighthouse looks exactly as it did in the 1920s photos she'd found. Unchanged, unchanging. Even the cottage has reverted completely, looking like it did when it was first built. But in one photo, taken from a boat offshore, there's someone in the lighthouse window. Just a shadow, but clearly a person. Sitting in that chair, probably, holding the seal. Carol doesn't know who. The last crew she sent never reported back. Their trucks were found abandoned at the property line. Maybe one of them understood. Maybe one of them stayed. She hopes so, because someone needs to be there at 6:17. Every day. Forever. Otherwise, the crack widens. The seal breaks. And whatever's been pressing against the other side for 175 years finally gets through. The Lighthouse Kid. Tommy Gwynn was what they called a lighthouse kid. Coast Guard brat who'd grown up on remote stations where his parents were assigned. By age 16, he'd lived in 12 different lighthouses, from Alaska to the Gulf Coast. He knew more about lighthouse operations than most career keepers, which is why what happened at Perdition Light in August 2023 hit him so hard. I met Tommy at a youth counseling center in Portland. He'd been referred there after what his parents called an episode. 3 days where he refused to sleep, wouldn't go near the ocean, and kept drawing the same lighthouse over and over with obsessive detail. Perdition Light was supposed to be the family's last posting before his dad retired. A tiny station on a rock off the Oregon coast, fully automated but still needing quarterly maintenance. They'd stay 3 months, do the upkeep, enjoy what his mom called their final lighthouse summer. Tommy had been excited. He'd spent his whole life at lighthouses, but had never been to Perdition. It was old, 1888 construction, and famously hard to reach. The rock it sat on was surrounded by currents that made boat approach dangerous, except at very specific times. Even helicopters had trouble with the constant updrafts. They arrived on a calm Tuesday morning, the whole family plus their dog, a German shepherd named Beacon. The lighthouse looked exactly like Tommy expected. White tower, red roof, attached single-story quarters. Small but well-maintained, with solar panels and modern equipment housing added in the 2000s. The first week was perfect. Tommy helped his dad service the equipment while his mom catalogued supplies and updated the station logs. Beacon chased seabirds. They had family dinners watching sunsets from the gallery. It was everything a last posting should be. Then Tommy found the hidden room. He'd been exploring the basement storage area, looking for old equipment to add to his collection. Behind a stack of fuel barrels, he noticed that the wall didn't match the foundation plans he'd studied. There should have been solid rock, but instead, there were bricks, old ones, different from the rest of the construction. He moved the barrels and found a door. Not hidden exactly, but placed where you wouldn't see it unless you were looking. It was locked with a modern padlock, which was weird. Everything else down there was rusted and ancient. Tommy knew he should tell his parents, but he was 16, curious, and had spent his whole life in lighthouses without finding anything really interesting. He got bolt cutters from the tool shed. The lock cut easily. The door opened on oiled hinges. Beyond was a narrow corridor carved into the rock, sloping down. The walls were wet, beaded with condensation that smelled like deep ocean. He followed it down, using his phone's flashlight. The corridor opened into a natural cave that had been modified. Floor leveled, walls reinforced with concrete. But old concrete, probably from when the lighthouse was built. In the center of the cave was a pool. Perfect circle, about 10 feet across, filled with black water that didn't reflect his light. The edges were lined with metal, brass or bronze, green with verdigris. Symbols were etched into the metal, mathematical formulas that hurt to follow. Tommy approached the pool. The water was completely still, like glass. He couldn't see the bottom, couldn't tell if it was 3 feet deep or 300. The smell was stronger here, salt and algae and something else, something organic. He was about to leave when he saw movement in the water. Not ripples. The surface remained perfectly still. But something underneath, a shadow shifting in depths his light couldn't reach. Then a hand broke the surface. Not violently. Slowly, carefully, like someone feeling their way. The hand was human in shape, but wrong in every detail. Too long, too pale, with webbing between fingers that had too many joints. It groped at the edge of the pool, found purchase on the metal rim. Another hand emerged, then arms, then a head that made Tommy drop his phone. It recovered the basic pattern of a human face, eyes, nose, mouth in roughly the right places, but stretched, distorted, like a reflection in disturbed water. The eyes were black, too large, with no whites. The mouth opened, showing rows of teeth that belonged in deep-sea fish. It spoke, not with its mouth. The words formed in Tommy's head, bypassing his ears entirely. The language wasn't English, wasn't any language he knew, but he understood anyway. Keeper's child. Finally. We have been calling so long. More shapes moved in the pool. More hands gripping the edges. How many were down there? How deep did that water go? Your bloodline tends the lights, generation to generation. But some lights tend back. Some lights are doors. This one has been calling your family for 3 generations. Your grandfather heard us. Your father is deaf to the frequency. But you hear perfectly. Tommy ran, scrambled up the corridor, slammed the door. Didn't stop until he was in his bedroom with the door locked and furniture piled against it. His parents found him there hours later, incoherent with terror. They didn't believe him at first. Thought he'd had a nightmare, maybe claustrophobia from exploring tight spaces. But when his dad went to check the basement, he found the door, found the cave, found the pool. He came back white-faced, packed their things, called for emergency evacuation. Wouldn't say what he'd seen, just kept repeating that they needed to leave. Now, immediately. But the weather turned. Storm from nowhere, winds too high for helicopter extraction, waves too rough for boats. They were trapped on the rock with whatever lived in that pool. The things started coming up at night. Tommy could hear them in the walls, wet sounds, like something crawling through pipes too small for it. His mom heard them too, started sleeping with all the lights on. Beacon growled at empty corners, hackles raised, tracking movement none of them could see. On the 3rd night, they came through the drains. Tommy woke to Beacon barking, frantic. His bedroom floor was covered in water, not flooding, but perfectly circular puddles, each about the size of a dinner plate. As he watched, something pushed up through one of the puddles. A hand like the one from the pool, reaching up from impossible depths. More hands emerged from other puddles. Then arms. Then heads that barely fit through the openings, but somehow squeezed through anyway. They pulled themselves up into his room. 3, 4, 7 of them. Dripping, stinking of deep places, moving with horrible grace. They surrounded his bed. Didn't attack, just watched with those black eyes. Waiting. One reached out, touched his foot with fingers that were too cold, too soft. It spoke in his head again. You can hear us. You can speak to us. The frequency is in your blood. Your family was chosen to tend the boundaries. Some of you forget, but the sea remembers. We remember. Tommy's scream finally broke through his paralysis. His parents burst in, found him surrounded by puddles of seawater, but nothing else. The things had gone back down, leaving only the smell and the water and marks on the floor that looked like handprints but weren't. They spent the rest of the night in the lamp room, as high as they could get. His dad tried the radio, but static was all they got. The storm raged on, impossible for the season, centered directly on their rock. The next day, Tommy's dad made a decision. He went down to the cave alone, despite his wife's protests. Took something with him, a bag of salt, Tommy noticed, industrial grade, used for de-icing. He was gone 2 hours. When he came back, he looked older, defeated. But the storm started to break. "I made a deal," he said. "They'll let us leave. But someone from our family has to come back. Has to take the posting when it comes available. Has to." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Tommy understood. His family hadn't been randomly assigned to lighthouses all these years. They'd been positioned, groomed, prepared for something his grandfather had agreed to, some bargain made with things that lived in deep places. The helicopter came that afternoon. They left everything behind, flew straight to the mainland. His dad retired immediately, moved the family to Arizona, as far from the ocean as they could get. But Tommy still hears them sometimes, in the pipes when he showers, in puddles after rain, calling in that frequency only he can hear, reminding him of the deal, telling him about the other. Lighthouse children scattered across the country, all hearing the same calls. He's 18 now. Last month, he got a letter from the Coast Guard. Petition Light needs a new keeper. The position is his if he wants it. Excellent pay, full benefits, housing provided. The letter mentions his family's long tradition of service and their unique qualifications. Tommy knows he'll go. Not today, maybe not this year, but eventually. The calling gets stronger every day. He dreams of that pool, of sinking into black water that goes down forever, of finally understanding what his grandfather learned, what deal was made, what price lighthouse families really pay. His parents don't talk about it, but sometimes he catches his dad staring at the ocean on maps, tracing currents with his finger, marking locations. Other lighthouses, Tommy thinks. Other pools. Other bargains made by desperate keepers who needed to protect ships from things worse than rocks. The lighthouse kids are out there, Tommy knows, growing up isolated, thinking they're just Coast Guard brats, not knowing they're part of something older, not knowing they can hear frequencies others can't, not knowing they've been marked since birth. But the sea knows. The deep places remember, and one by one, they're calling the children home. The insurance adjusters report. Lydia Chan had been investigating insurance claims for 15 years, specializing in maritime property damage. She'd seen it all: hurricane damage, vandalism, mysterious fires that turned out to be owner arson. But the claim on Merrow Point Lighthouse was different. I found Lydia through a mutual friend who knew I collected these stories. She'd retired early, moved inland, and generally didn't talk about her last case. But after a few drinks, she agreed to tell me what happened in October 2022. The claim came from the Merrow Point Heritage Foundation. They'd been restoring the lighthouse as a museum when unexpected structural damage forced them to halt work. They wanted their insurance to cover $2.8 million in repairs, plus additional funds for specialist consultation. Lydia drove out on a grey Thursday morning. Merrow Point was in northern Maine, accessible only by a private road that wound through miles of pine forest. The lighthouse sat on a promontory overlooking the Atlantic, classic New England architecture, white tower, red brick keeper's house, black iron gallery. The Heritage Foundation's project manager, a nervous man named David, met her at the gate. He'd been eager on the phone, almost desperate to get the claim approved, but in person he seemed reluctant to even approach the lighthouse. "We've had some setbacks," he said, leading her toward the building. "The contractors won't come back. Say it's unsafe. But we've had engineers check. Structurally, it's sound. The restoration had been going well," David explained. They'd repaired the exterior, updated the electrical, started work on converting the keeper's house into a visitor center. Then they began restoring the lighthouse tower itself. "That's when things got complicated," David said, stopping about 50 feet from the entrance. "The damage. It's hard to explain. You should see for yourself." Lydia had investigated hundreds of damaged buildings. She wasn't easily impressed. But when she entered the lighthouse, she understood why the contractors had fled. The interior walls were covered in what looked like impact damage. Thousands of dents and scratches, as if something had been trying to break through from inside the walls. But the exterior was untouched. Whatever had caused this damage had come from within the structure itself. The spiral staircase was worse. The iron steps were bent and twisted, some pulled completely out of their mountings, not rusted or corroded, physically deformed, like they'd been gripped by something incredibly strong and wrenched out of shape. "When did this happen?" Lydia asked, photographing everything. "That's the thing," David said. "It didn't happen all at once. Every morning there was new damage, always between 2 and 4 a.m. We set up cameras, but—" He showed her the footage on his phone. Time-lapse of the lighthouse interior, infrared mode. At 2:17 a.m., the walls began to bulge outward, like something massive was moving through the spaces between. The staircase twisted on its own, metal screaming. The audio was horrific. Then, at exactly 4 a.m., everything stopped. "We thought maybe it was settling," David said. "Old building, new work disturbing the foundation. But then we found the room." He led her to what should have been a utility closet on the second floor. But when they'd opened the wall to run new wiring, they'd found a space that shouldn't exist. A room that extended back into areas that, architecturally, should have been solid stone. Lydia peered inside with her flashlight. The room went back at least 30 feet, walls covered in what looked like tally marks, thousands of them, carved deep into stone. And at the far end, barely visible, was what appeared to be a door. Not a normal door, a metal hatch, like something from a ship. "Did you open it?" she asked. "One of the contractors tried," David said. "That's when they all quit." He said he heard sounds from the other side, like flooding, like drowning. "But that's impossible. We're 40 feet above sea level, and that direction faces away from the ocean." Lydia documented everything, took measurements. The room definitely shouldn't exist. It extended into what should have been solid cliff face. She approached the hatch, noted that it was warm to the touch despite the October chill. There was a wheel lock on the hatch, like a submarine door. Without asking David's permission, she spun it. It moved easily, too easily for something that had supposedly been sealed for decades. The hatch opened outward, revealing another impossibility. Water, a vertical wall of dark water, held back by nothing, like looking into an aquarium. But this water moved with current and depth, and in it, Lydia saw lights. Deep-sea phosphorescence, maybe, or something else. The lights moved in patterns, like signals, like messages. Something swam past the opening, too quick to see clearly, but big, very big. The water rippled with its passage, and for a moment, Lydia thought she saw an eye. Massive, intelligent, staring directly at her. She slammed the hatch shut, spun the wheel lock. Her hands were shaking. In 15 years of investigation, she'd never encountered something she couldn't explain. But it gets worse, David said quietly. We found records hidden in the foundation when we were doing structural work. The lighthouse was built on something, a place the indigenous people avoided. They called it a wound in the water. The builders knew. They built the lighthouse specifically to seal it. He showed her photocopies of old documents, construction plans that included containment procedures, letters from the architect talking about necessary sacrifices and maintaining the seal, a ledger showing that every keeper who'd served at Marrow Point had disappeared, their replacements arriving to find empty quarters and no explanation. The restoration work, Lydia said, understanding. You've been breaking the seal. David nodded miserably. We didn't know. How could we know? But every improvement we make, every wall we repair, the damage gets worse. It's like the lighthouse is fighting us, or something inside it is. Lydia had seen enough. This wasn't an insurance case. It was something else entirely. She told David she'd file her report, recommend full payment plus emergency funds. Whatever was happening at Marrow Point, it was beyond her expertise. But as she was leaving, she noticed something that made her stop cold. The tally marks in the impossible room. She'd photographed them, thinking they were random. But looking at the images now, she could see a pattern. Groups of marks, separated by gaps. She counted. Each group had between 365 and 366 marks. Years. Someone had been marking years. David, she called out. When was the lighthouse built? 1854, he answered. She did the math. If each group was a year, and they started in 1854, there were too many marks. By her count, someone had been tallying years until 2089. 67 years in the future. She left Marrow Point that afternoon and never went back. Filed her report recommending claim approval, but also strongly suggesting the Heritage Foundation abandon the restoration. Cited insurmountable structural challenges and cost-prohibitive repairs. They took her advice. Marrow Point Lighthouse remains abandoned, slowly being reclaimed by the elements. The foundation posts security now, keeps people out. For safety, they say. But Lydia knows the truth. It's not to keep people safe from the lighthouse. It's to keep the lighthouse doing its job, to keep it sealed, to make sure no one else opens that hatch and sees what's waiting in impossible water, counting down years that haven't happened yet. She retired 6 months later. Lives in Denver now, about as far from the ocean as you can get. But sometimes she wakes up at 2:17 a.m., sure she can hear metal bending, stone cracking, something massive moving through spaces that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, in her dreams, she's back at that hatch, opening it again, seeing that enormous eye looking back, understanding finally what the lighthouse was built to contain, what it's been holding back for over a century, understanding why someone, somewhere, is counting years into a future that might not come if the seal breaks, if the wound in the water opens wide, if the things that swim in vertical seas finally find their way through.